Just before starting the actual Sicha, just go through a few psukim that are going to be very relevant in our Sicha. So towards the end of Perek Aleph of Bamidbar, we have in Pasuk Nun Aleph, it speaks about how when the Mishkan traveled, the Levium would take down the Mishkan. Then when the Mishkan camped, the Levium would put it up. And the Pasuk says, V'hazar hakarev yumos, any outsider, any foreigner that's not a Levi, that gets close will be put to death. That's Pasuk Nun Aleph. In Pasuk Nun Beis, it speaks about how the Yidden would camp, each one in their own group, all around, each one with their own banner, each one keeping to their own camps. And then in Pasuk Nun Gimel, which is going to be the main focus of our Sicha, the Pasuk says that the Leviim camped right around the Mishkan, and then there won't be an anger on the Yidden, and Leviim should guard the Mishkan, etc. So now we start the actual Sicha itself. And the Rebbe says, on the Pasuk V'Leviim Yachanu, this last Pasuk we just quoted, the Leviim will camp around the Mishkan Edus, and there won't be an anger on Adas B'nai Yisrael. Rashi quotes the words V'lo yiyeh ketzev, there won't be an anger, and explains Im ta'asu k'mitzvosai, if you do follow according to my mitzvos, lo yiyeh ketzev, there won't be anger. The im lav, and if not, she'ikonsu zorim ba'avoidosam zu, if foreigners go into this avoida, to their avoida, this avoida of theirs, yiyeh ketzev, then there will be an anger. Says the Rebbe, we need to understand. Rashi already brought a number of times the rule that michlal lav atashemei hein. From the negative, you can understand the positive. So since the pasuk says that if you fulfill the command, lo yiyeh ketzev, there won't be an anger. So it's quite obvious, it's self-evident that if you will not fulfill what says in the pasuk, yiyeh ketzev, there will be an anger. So what is Rashi actually telling us in his pirush? Even if we want to say that Rashi wants to emphasize not just that if the Yidden don't listen to the command, there will be an anger, but rather Rashi is trying to emphasize that the whole point of the pasuk is to tell us the punishment. That, in other words, that if Yidden don't listen, there will be this anger. Because to say that if you listen to the mitzvahs, there won't be a punishment, obviously there's no chiddush. Rashi clearly didn't have to say that part, so he's mainly trying to focus on the aspect that there will be a punishment if you don't listen. Nevertheless, says the Rebbe, it's still not understood. Why the arichus, why the length in Rashi's wording, im ta'asu k'mitzvos, if you'll do my mitzvahs, there won't be an anger. If not, that foreigners will go into this avodah of theirs, there will be an anger. Rashi could have just said very, very briefly, on the words v'lo yiyeh ketzev, there won't be anger. Rashi could have very easily said ha'im lo ta'asu, but if you don't do if you don't do this, then there will be an anger. This would be actually similar to what Rashi has done already earlier in Parsha Shmini, on the pasuk where it says Rosheichem al tifro, etc. V'lo musu. So this is speaking about koyanim not being allowed to grow their hair long, etc. And so the pasuk says, don't grow your hair long so you won't die. Rashi says, but if you do so, you will die. So it's straight to the point and brief. So why over here does Rashi have to elaborate? So there are Mefarshim that explain that the chiddush of Rashi over here is not the actual idea that if you won't listen, then there will be an anger. But rather, Rashi is coming to tell us who the pasuk is referring to. Who is the pasuk mean there won't be an anger on? Because when we look simply or at first glance at the pasuk, you might think it's referring to the Leviim, because the pasuk started off, the Leviim will camp around the Mishkan. And then it says there won't be an anger. So it sounds like if they won't do this, there won't be an anger. And if not, in other words, they do what they're supposed to, there won't be an anger. And if not, if the Leviim don't camp there, there will be an anger. That's what you may think. So Rashi is coming to negate this pirush and says, no, it's referring to that if foreigners come in to do their avodah. In other words, v'lo yiyeh ketzev is a continuation to that previous pasuk that we mentioned before, two psukim back, of a hazara karev yumos, that anyone that approaches the avodah of the Leviim will be put to death. And that's what Rashi is saying over here. When the pasuk says v'lo yiyeh ketzev, it's trying to say that if foreigners do come into your avodah, then there will be an anger on the Yidden. But the Rebbe says that's also not understood. First of all, again, the arichos, the elaboration at the beginning of Rashi, still seems to be unnecessary, where he says, if you're going to do my mitzvahs, there won't be an anger. What's Rashi telling us with this? Rashi should have just started off with a negative, that if anyone will come in to do your avodah, there will be anger. Number two, says the Rebbe, even if for some reason Rashi does want to say the positive as well, but why does Rashi say it in a way, im ta'asu k'mitzvoise, if you do my mitzvahs, without really explaining which mitzvah particularly, which issue we're actually dealing with? Seemingly, Rashi should have said by the positive, just like he concludes with a negative. Rashi should have said, if no foreigners will go into your avodah, or something like that, then there won't be an anger. And if they do go in, then there will be anger. Rashi just says, if you do like my mitzvahs. Another point, says the Rebbe, Rashi's wording, sheyikonsu zorim, foreigners will come in, ba'avoidosam zu, in this avodah of theirs. Says the Rebbe, this also doesn't seem to be smooth. Generally, Rashi uses the wording of the pasuk. If, as these Mefarshim said, that this is going back to that previous pasuk, where it says, v'hazor ha'karev yumos, that a foreigner that gets close to the avodah will die, so then Rashi should have used that expression, that if a foreigner karev gets close to their avodah, then there will be this punishment. Why does Rashi say this expression, sheyikonsu zorim ba'avoidosam zu, that they will go into this avodah? Why not just simply the expression of karev? And also, what's this lashon rabim sheyikonsu zorim? In the pasuk it says v'hazor hakarev yumos, that previous pasuk. So why is Rashi changing it to zorim in the plural? The Rebbe now looks at the continuation of Rashi. And Rashi says, as we find in the story of Korach, where it says, Ki yotzo haketzef, that Hashem's anger came out, etc. The Rebbe says, seemingly it's totally not understood. Number one, what's Rashi trying to prove from the story of Korach? Do we need any proof that when Hashem warns that there's going to be some sort of punishment or anger for the Aveira of, in this case, a foreigner getting close to the Avodah, do we need any proof to say, yes, the punishment will come? Is that what Rashi is trying to prove? More importantly, says the Rebbe, what is even the proof from Ma'aseh Korach? Seemingly, this has nothing to do with that which is being discussed in our pasuk. By the story of Korach, where it says that expression, that the anger came out before Hashem, wasn't actually to do with the Aveira of any foreigners going in to the Avodah of the Leviim. Rather, this is connected with a story towards the end of the Ma'aseh Korach, when there was a Magefa, when there was a plague that struck down Yidden, because they started complaining on the following day of the story of Korach. They were saying to Moshe and Aaron that you killed the nation of Hashem, so a plague broke out because of this anger. So how is that related to what we're discussing over here about foreigners coming into the Avodah? Furthermore, even if we go back to the original Aveira, for which the 250 people were punished, they brought the Ktoires. It's also not similar to what we're talking about over here about foreigners going into the Avodah of the Leviim, of these psukim, because in our psukim we're speaking about the Avodah of the Leviim, referring to taking down the Mishkan, setting up the Mishkan, guarding the Mishkan, is the Avodah of the Leviim. Where there it's speaking about that no one, including even Leviim, is allowed to do the Avodah of the Kohen, the Avodah HaKahuna. The Rebbe says it's a very big doichek, it's very difficult to say that Rashi is only trying to bring an example for the concept of a ketzef, of an anger, of a punishment, even though we're speaking about a totally different Aveira. Says the Rebbe, so there are Mefarshim that say that this idea in Rashi is coming in continuation to the Rashi on that previous pasuk, on Vahazora Korev Yumos, which was again 2 psukim back. Over there, Rashi says Yumos shall be put to death. Rashi says Bidei Shamayim will be put to death by Hashem. Now, seemingly, where is Rashi getting in Pshuti Shal Mikra that Yumos means Misa Bidei Shamayim, and that it's not Misa Bidei Yodim, that he's going to be put to death by Beis Din? Seemingly, on the contrary, there's a pasuk of Gamba Olav Yumos, which uses the same expression, Yumos, in Parshas Mishpatim, and there it's speaking about an animal that killed someone. But Rashi says that it means bidei shamayim, and then Rashi has to start proving yachal bidei adam. You might think yumas means you should be put to death by people. Talmud loyma, Rashi has to come up with a whole limud, a way how we know that it means bidei shamayim. So we see clearly that if we don't have a proof, then yumas would usually mean put to death, would mean by people. So where is Rashi getting that he's being put to death by Hashem? And that's what Rashi is saying here. This is what these Mefarshim are saying. This is what Rashi is proving from the story of Kairach, that we learn it out from the pasuk that says V'lo yiyeh ketzef. Since in our pasuk says there won't be an anger, so Rashi is saying this means a punishment by Hashem, like we find in the story of Kairach. Because in the story of Kairach, the people that brought the Ketores were punished bidei shamayim, and that proves Va'azora karev yumos. The word yumos over here as well. Because we had the word ketzef here, and two psukim back, when it said yumas, it's referring to this same ketzef, the anger that's being discussed over here, and therefore it means bidei shamayim. But the Rebbe says seemingly this pirush is a very big doichik. It's very difficult to say this, because in this pirush Rashi there is no hint at all. In other words, in our pasuk where it speaks about ketzef and he's bringing a proof from Kairach, there's no hint at all to that previous Rashi where he mentioned that anyone that comes close to the avodah of the Leviim will be put to death, where Rashi said it means bidei shamayim. From the simple reading of Rashi, it seems to be that the proof from Ma'aseh Kairach is the actual idea of anyone coming into the avodah of the Leviim, there will be an anger on them, not about what kind of death they will get. Says the Rebbe, we could explain this all by first pointing out a ha'ara, a certain comment about the whole order of these few psukim that we mentioned before. So again, we have that first pasuk that says Va'azora karev yumas. Any foreigner, anyone that's not of the Leviim, tries to approach to do the avodah of the Leviim will be put to death. We have our pasuk that we're discussing, that v'lo yiyeh ketzef, that there won't be an anger, etc. But in between those two psukim, we have the pasuk v'chanu b'nei Yisrael, that the Yidden will camp, each one in his camp, each one with his banner, with their own groups. We then have also the beginning of our pasuk that we're discussing, where it says V'aleviim yachanu, and the Leviim will camp around the Mishkan HaEdus. And then it mentions this idea of v'lo yiyeh ketzef, that there won't be an anger. And the question becomes, what are we talking about? What is v'lo yiyeh ketzef referring to? There won't be an anger if what? If v'lo yiyeh ketzef, if the anger we're talking about is back to that same previous point of two psukim back, of V'hazora karev yumas, that any foreigner that gets close will be put to death, which is speaking about the Bnei Yisrael, not about Leviim, then the question is, number one, why are we mentioning these other points in the middle? About where the Yidden are going to camp and where the Leviim are going to camp, in between two psukim that seem to be speaking about the same idea, about the punishment that of someone that tries to get involved in the avodah of the Leviim. Number two, we need to understand, what is the difference between the two psukim? Why do we need two psukim to speak about a person being punished for approaching the avodah? The pasuk said already, V'azara karev yumas, any foreigner that gets close will be put to death. What is being added by saying v'lo yiyeh ketzef, that if you do this, there won't be an anger, implying that if you do it, then there will be an anger, as Rashi says. So that's if it's referring to the Yidden approaching the avodah of the Leviim. On the other hand, if you'll say that v'lo yiyeh ketzef, that it shouldn't be an anger, is referring only to the Leviim themselves, and then you wouldn't have these questions that we just mentioned about why it has to be repeated and why are we speaking in the middle about the camping, because now we are actually speaking about the Leviim. And what we're saying is that if the Leviim don't camp around the Mishkan, as the pasuk says, even if it didn't end up leading to other Yidden approaching the Mishkan and approaching the avodah, nevertheless, there will be an anger. And ketzef over here doesn't mean, like in the previous pasuk, of actually being put to death, but some sort of lighter punishment. In other words, the Leviim are considered ligyon shel melech, they are considered legions of the king, the army of the king. And as the pasuk says, V'hayu li Leviim, the Leviim will be mine. Nesunim nehem, they're given to me. They're close to Hashem. And you might say that if they don't camp around the Mishkan, Hashem will be angry. And then there will be this opposite approach. They won't have this closeness to Hashem. So then the Rebbe says, the question is then even stronger. Then the pasuk says clearly, V'lo yiyeh ketzef al hadas b'nei Yisrael. How can you say it's speaking about some problem about Leviim? clearly was speaking about an Aveira, something to do with the Bnei Yisrael, not about the Leviim. So this is what's bothering Rashi. What's going on in these psukim? So Rashi says, Im ta'asu kimitzvoisai lo yiyeh ketzev. If you will do what I commanded, then there won't be an anger. And if not, if foreigners go into your avodah, there will be an anger. And Rashi, in this way, is answering and explaining what's going on in these psukim, and what seems to be the contradiction of these psukim. That is, when it says v'lo yiyeh ketzev in our pasuk, when it says there won't be an anger, and in the pasuk that speaks about the Leviim camping right around the Mishkan, is because that's going to ensure that there shouldn't be an anger on Adas B'nai Yisrael, on the rest of the Yidden. How so? Says Rashi, Im ta'asu kimitzvoisai. If you're going to fulfill the mitzvahs that are being discussed in this parsha, which their general discussion of a lot of these psukim is all about, this idea of where the Yidden camp, and in our pasuk specifically, that the Leviim are camping right around the Mishkan of Eidos. If you're going to do what it says in this pasuk, that the Leviim are going to camp in the right spot, then v'lo yiyeh ketzev, then there won't be an anger. But if not, if you're not going to follow my instructions, that's going to end up leading to, this is going to be a cause. If you don't camp around the Mishkan, you're going to end up causing that zorim, that foreigners are going to enter into your avodah, and that will cause, that will be an anger on the rest of the Yidden. How do we understand all of this? Says the Rebbe, the general idea of our parsha over here is, as the pasuk says, "Va'ata hafkedes Leviim," appoint the Leviim over the Mishkan Eidos, they should be serving there. This is a general command and a warning about the special separations, borders, boundaries that Hashem set up between the Leviim and the rest of the Yidden and the Yisraelim. And in that way, to ensure that no foreigners will end up approaching the Mishkan and doing the avodah there. And this is what the Torah is saying. V'chanu b'nei Yisrael ishal machaneu v'ishal digloi l'tzevoisem. The Yidden will all rest. They will camp, each one in their own place with their own banners in their own groups. It's not only to ensure that there won't be v'hazar hakar of humans, that no one should approach the Mishkan and then die. That you shouldn't come to do the avodah of the Leviim, but it's really much more than that. There's a special command over here, an independent idea that we need to keep the borders, the separations, the distinctions and boundaries by the Bnei Yisrael. And in continuation to this, the Torah says, and the Leviim are going to camp right around the Mishkan Eidos, and then there won't be an anger on the rest of the Yidden. In other words, the pasuk is continuing to explain the seriousness of keeping these set up boundaries of Achanu B'nai Yisrael, that the Yidden each one need to rest and camp in their own place, and the Leviim camp right around the Mishkan. Because with this, we're also going to ensure that there shouldn't be any anger. And this is what Rashi is emphasizing with his words, Im ta'asu kemitzvos, if you're going to keep to my mitzvahs. Which mitzvahs are we talking about? Keeping these boundaries. Then lo yiyeh ketzev, then there won't be an anger. And from the negative, we understand the positive. That if you get rid of these boundaries, that's going to cause anger. But at this point, if the boundaries are broken down, the anger didn't actually result in anything yet. No punishment came as a result of it yet. And that's what Rashi continues and emphasizes. The imlav, sheyikonsu zorim b'avedosam zu. So if you don't keep these boundaries and these foreigners do enter into your avodah, there will be an anger. In other words, only once the breaking down of the barriers and the boundaries led to foreigners actually coming in practically, then the anger will materialize and come out practically as well. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand why Rashi changed his wording. The words, what we thought before, was a change from the pasuk. And instead of using the words of a hazor hakorev, that the foreigner that gets close will be put to death, Rashi says, she konsu zorim. First of all, instead of korev, he says, she konsu, it will go in. And we said zorim in plural, b'avedosam zu in this avodah. Because these two psukim, now we understand, are talking about two different things. The previous pasuk was actually speaking about the individual punishment for an individual that does the aveira of approaching and doing the Leviim's avodah. In this case, it's the avodah of what's discussed over there, taking down the Mishkan, putting up the Mishkan, and so on. And that's why Vahazor is in the singular, because even individual, one person would have the isur of doing this avodah, of taking apart and putting together the Mishkan. But in our pasuk, when Rashi says ba'avoidosam zu, that Rashi is referring to here in the pasuk where he speaks there won't be an anger, is referring to the avodah that's being discussed in our pasuk, this idea of all the Yidden camping, each one in their own place, and the Leviim camping right around the Mishkan, meaning to say again, this idea, there shouldn't be the breaking down of the boundaries generally. There's a Machane Yisrael, the camp for the rest of the Yidden, and there's a Machane for the Leviim, the camp of the Leviim, and they need to remain separate. And that's what Rashi says, Sheyikonsu Zorim in the plural, because if it would be an individual just coming and setting up his tent in the Machane of Leviah, you wouldn't say now there's a whole mess up, that now there is a camp of Yisraelim in the middle of Machane Leviah. A Machane, a camp, is Zorim if many people are starting to come in now and set up camp over here. So Rashi is telling us this is what we're speaking about, that we need to keep these boundaries and separations. Here is Machane Yisrael, here is Machane Leviah. It's for the same reason that Rashi changes from the word Hazor HaKorev, which again, that was speaking about someone approaching the Avodah, and here we're saying Yikonsu, if they come in. Because our pasuk, we're speaking about this idea of camping inside the Machane Leviah, so it's not, we wouldn't use the word Korev if someone comes close. We're saying Yikonsu, if they come in, if they start settling in this camp. As opposed to the previous pasuk where we were speaking about someone coming over to take apart the Mishkan or put together the Mishkan, there it actually makes much more sense to say the word Korev if anyone gets close to do this avodah. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand the proof from the story of Korach. Rashi wants to bring a proof for these two extremes that we just spoke about over here. The idea that on the one hand, if the boundaries were just taken down, in other words, you're not doing according to what Hashem wanted in setting up these separate camps. On the one hand, that already causes some form of anger. But on the other hand, when is the anger really expressed and a punishment coming actually from it is only going to be if these Zorim, if these foreigners actually, as a result of breaking these barriers, now approach and do the Avodah. Says the Rebbe, this is what we see by the story of Korach. The sin of Korach was that he wanted to destroy the separations by the Yidden. His argument was, all the Yidden are all holy. Why are you holding yourself higher than the rest of the Yidden, the nation of Hashem? This Aveira brought out the anger on all the Yidden. As the pasuk says, Hashem says, "He bodlu mitochayim, get away from the rest of the congregation. I want to destroy them in one moment, in one instant." So on the one hand, there was already some form of anger there, but on the other hand, even though that Korach had already sort of tried to drag in all of the people into his machloikas, as Rashi says in the Spatu Kulam, they're all convinced by his arguments, but practically the anger of Hashem didn't actually bring to a punishment, didn't come down into actuality, as Moshe and Aaron, in fact, say to Hashem, if one person sins, you're going to get angry at everyone else. And it was only after you had the 250 people that brought the Ketores. In other words, after these separations were broken down, and it brought something, the Poel Mamish, it actually brought to actuality that now foreigners were coming, people that were not Koyanim, not from the children of Aaron, were coming and bringing Ketores in front of Hashem. And furthermore, the Yidden are, even after this whole story, are complaining. Now comes the next stage, that anger didn't only, which started already earlier, doesn't only remain in potential, but Yotzaketz of the anger actually came out, and Hashem started killing some of the Yidden in that plague. Says the Rebbe, from all of this, we have a lesson how careful we need to be with another Yid. Even though Korach gathers all the Yidden in a major machloikas against Moshe Rabbeinu, nevertheless, the anger does not come out from before Hashem yet. Furthermore, as long as Korach's machloikas was only with arguments and with speech, but it didn't express itself in action yet, so even Korach and his people didn't deserve punishment yet. They didn't get punishment yet. It's only once there was the action after strong warnings, and they now continue and they bring the Ketores. This is when the anger comes out. First, again, the punishment on them themselves, and then finally this plague against Bnei Yisrael. Says the Rebbe, from here we have Oira. Even we see a Yid that for various reasons, he's lacking in the way he's careful from certain negative things. But as long as it doesn't come down into actuality, lachlek ala Kadosh Baruch Hu, to fight against Hashem. So the Yid is still in a situation that he's still finding favor in the eyes of Hashem. There's no anger, chas v'shalom. On the contrary, Hashem extends his anger, and Hashem helps him in a way of chen, in a way of favor, grace, and love, that he should do tshuva, and then he will become v'nechmut, completely beloved and acceptable, accepted and desired to Hashem.